My two guests today and I are all dear friends. The three of us worked together on peace development for many years, both in the U.S. and in the Middle East. We gathered for this episode today to talk about the current internal threat to the democratic government in Israel. A collapse of a democratic government there would have enormously detrimental impacts on not only the Jewish and Arab and other citizens of Israel, but it also has the potential to upend the geopolitical balance throughout the world. As you'll learn, both my guests are highly educated with deep experience. Raed Mualem is a Palestinian citizen of Israel, born into an indigenous Christian family. He's a professor and department head of natural and environmental science at Oranim Academic College near Haifa. He works with Arab and Jewish students in local high schools, bringing them together to work on environmental projects. Shaul Gabbay is a Jewish citizen of Israel and a U.S. citizen, a former professor and head of the Institute for the Study of Israel in the Middle East at the University of Denver. He went on to found and currently directs the Global Research Institute and continues to publish academic papers and books. So please, if you would, take a moment to subscribe and rate this podcast. And now please enjoy my conversation with Raed Mualem and Shaul Gabbay. Hello and welcome,
Hello.
Raed Mualem,
Hello.
Shaul Gabbay. Thank you both so much for being here, for joining me. It's lovely to see you. It's amazing to see the three of us on one call in one place. I don't think that we've been together in one place, even like this, for over 10 years or something. So
Thank you for
so
doing this,
welcome.
Abby.
Yeah, it's a
Sure.
great opportunity, and really thank you.
So, and welcome to How We Change the World podcast. I think the three of us individually have been trying to change the world on our own and sometimes together throughout most of our lives. So I think it's appropriate that we're all on the show together. We go back 20 years, a little bit more for a couple of us. We met back in 2007 or 6 or something back in the University of Denver, and then also in Israel, and we've had a lot of collaboration together. So welcome, and let me just start with Raed. Do you want to go ahead? Let me start with you, Raed. It's been a pleasure for all of us. Thank you. So, Raed, let's start with you just to give a little bit of background on who you both are, you each are. You are Palestinian by your heritage, and you're born to a Christian family in Israel. You're actually born when the country was Israel. You are multi-educated with several degrees. I think all of them from Tel Aviv University, if I'm not mistaken. But you have degrees. You have a PhD. You have a postdoc. You've been to law school as well, I believe. Can you tell me about that a little bit?
Yeah, I study at law school in Tel Aviv University as well in the last 3 years,
So you're a lifetime student.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity that to keep ourselves challenging our thought. And I discovered that I need the knowledge and the tools, and the law school is a good place to realize and understanding the concept of a human right and to use the tools in order to make better for everybody.
So what is your current position? What are you doing for work as we speak?
Right now, I'm a head of department of nature sciences and environmental sciences at Oranim Academic College, as well as I'm leading a form of head of department of science at Mofate Institute, who in charge of all the academic college who prepare teachers in Israel.
Okay.
And in addition, I'm assisting and helping some local school, Arab and Jews, in order to create opportunity for the new generation and work together in peace, in science, and in environmental projects.
Wow.
So I'm very busy, what I say.
Yes, you're always very busy, very industrious. And you're a lifelong citizen of Israel, and you still live in Israel now. And Oranim is relatively close to
Haifa. Yeah, it's about
Haifa,
20 minutes from Haifa.
where you live now. Okay, so welcome. And Shaul Gabbay, you are also Israeli-born and educated through getting your master's, which you got from the Technion. And you were also in the Israeli Defense Force as an officer. And all of that before coming to the United States. I'm not sure what year. What year did you come to the U.S.?
1991.
For school?
I went to Columbia University, did my PhD, then University of Chicago. Then I went back to Israel to teach at Technion, and then returned to direct the Institute for the Study of Israel and the Middle East at University of Denver, through which I met you and I met Raed, and we were working on joint projects that were attempting at the level of people to bring peace. We did several projects together, which were wonderful, and which I believe that made a change. And of course, then after that, I left the University of Denver, and we formed the Global Research Institute in Denver, where we're all three of us are research associates, which is a platform to conduct our research, write our books. Raed was gracious enough to join, as well as yourself, and but still, of course, continuing to publish, continuing to work on different projects which have to do in the Middle East and the Muslim world. And here we are now discussing what you want to discuss, which are the issues in Israel.
Right. And you're currently, just for the audience to know why we're speaking like this, because you are in Israel now, but you're visiting, but you still live in the United States now.
Yes, I live in the United States. I quite often, every few months, I visit in Israel. Actually, last time when I visited in Israel, I met Raed, and it was a wonderful time to spend together and to share our knowledge and opinions. And now I'm visiting in Israel and returning next week. And this is where I'm at this moment, in Haifa, in Israel.
Oh, you guys, you're pretty close to one another right now.
Far. Right.
Are you in the separate 2 rooms in the same house? And you're
no.
All right. So, well, the question at hand today, and the reason that we are all together to have this conversation, has to do with I think we could legitimately call it a crisis that's has been unfolding in Israel, starting probably in about January of this year. Mass protests that have erupted, that at least I know, Shaul, when you were there, you participated in, and perhaps you have as well, Raed, you can tell us. But this is after lawmakers passed what was a highly contested bill that would gut the power of Israel's Supreme Court. And it would do that by preventing it from blocking government decisions that the court deems unreasonable. For Americans who are mostly in the audience, this might be confusing. We have a very different separation of power in this country than you do in Israel. So there's a lot of fallout that has happened. You can talk about the reservists who have said that they're not going to show up if they're called. A former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, actually, and I think perhaps both of you have said you believe that this crisis has the ability or the potential to create civil war in Israel. So we're not talking about anything that is not very, very serious and that doesn't have implications for even those of us sitting here in the United States as well as around the world. It's a geopolitical event that we hear almost nothing about here in the U.S. And that's one of the reasons, with you both being such experts in the area and living there and having been from there, that you can comment on it. So I just would like to start with each of you. Perhaps this time I'll start with you, Shaul, just to say, could you provide from your perspective, and for what it's worth, you were Jewish, Raed is Christian, he's Arab, whatever, we're all good friends, but you do have probably different perspectives. So that's the beauty of it. If you could start, Shaul, with just giving an explanation of what you think the Supreme Court situation is from your perspective and understanding.
So you said that the significance of separations of powers is that you have the government, like in any other place, then you have the court, which can, with its powers, limit, interpret the law. And then you have the makers, which is in any country, the parliament, depending how it's separated to houses, Senate, House. But in Israel, it's the Knesset, which is one parliament, which has 120 Knesset members. And the unique situation in Israel, which is based on the British system, not the U.S. system, because recall that the British controlled mandate Palestine before the creation of Israel, so the law goes back and the system goes back to the British system. And in this system, basically, those who control the parliament also are elected to be the government. So already there, you don't have a real separation because the coalition is based on the majority in the parliament. So whatever the government wants to pass in the parliament, in the Knesset, they can do that because they have the majority. That's how they would be elected. And for many years, there were problems that emanated from the fact that most of the society was 50-50, so any one Knesset member could basically create a situation where the government falls. But in the last elections, the coalition, which is relatively right in its ideology, was formed based on 64 Knesset members, so 64 out of 120, so a clear majority. Now, like I said earlier, already the system, inherently in the system, there is no separation between the parliament, the Knesset, and the government. So, of course, the role and the weight of the court, particularly the Supreme Court, in limiting and interpreting the law and limiting the government in its actions is very important because it's only really two entities, the government controlling the Knesset, the parliament, and on the other hand, the court. So if in any way the government also controls and limits the court, then you really don't have any separation at all. And then it becomes a situation where the government, particularly the prime minister, controls the country. And that's why the slogans are that we want democracy, we don't want dictatorship. Because dictatorship is basically that the prime minister can do anything that he wants. And that's why it's such a cardinal situation now in Israel, which touches upon many, many other cleavages that exist naturally within the society, such as Arabs and Jews, Jews from particular countries, Ashkenazi and Sephardic, religious and non-religious. But this is at the crux of the possibility that Israel, the beacon of democracy in the Middle East, will continue to really be a democracy. And this is to the extent to why this could be jeopardized if this reform of limiting the court would move forward.
Okay. Thank you for that. Very deep and really important conversation because it sounds to me like what you're saying is there's really only two powers and one of them's being gutted, just to kind of cut to the chase of that. And that power is the Supreme Court.
The attempt to,
and that's what's at risk. The
exactly.
attempted, yeah.
Right. So
okay.
So until now, the court was able to judge the decisions of the government. Namely, let's say that the government decides to jail a particular individual contrary to human rights. So that individual could could appeal to the court, and the court would say, well, this decision is not reasonable, and therefore you have to release this person. If the government has the ability to limit the court in making these decisions, then basically the government is controlling everything.
It's an authoritarian, yeah. Raed, what about, how do you see this?
Well, you see, I will try to explain that from the law perspective. As student who graduated from law school. You
Mm-hmm.
see, in Israel, it's a unique state. In fact, in Israel, has no any single document known as constitutions, but it has what we call a several basic law that have granted constitutionally status by the Supreme Court. They use that in order to serve them to limit the power of the government. So, in fact, we have regular law. Above that, we have basic law, and then the Supreme Court. Now, if a regular law violates the rights, the right which is protected in a basic law, the Supreme Court in Israel may strike down and declare it unconstitutional. This is the situation where we're going now in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this unique constitutional structure exposes Israel to a dangers of democratic erosion, much more than any democratic state. This is the weakness. This is our weakness. Now, our parliament, the Knesset, has 120 members,
Mm-hmm.
and 61 votes are all you need to change Israel basic laws. This is exactly what happened now. 61 is all you need to change the system of government, to change the power of court, even to become a non-democratic state where we are now. That's what Shaul mentioned. We want a democratic state. And that, in fact, a real challenge, which is really can limit and create a lot of challenge. Now, in every country, like if we take in the state, there are mechanisms, there are tools
Mm-hmm.
which can decentralize political power, which we called it in scientific way, checks and balances. That's what Joe Biden mentioned to Netanyahu, checks and balances. This is the two strategy. Now,
Mm-hmm.
for example, if you have a constitution in the state and you have a constitution, we don't have a written constitution, which is can protect all the human right. Sometimes in the state, they have the president has the right for veto, or
Mm-hmm.
you have the federal structure, you have the Senate, you have
Mm-hmm.
the Congress, and sometimes you have even the extension of the international organization court, such like the European Court of Human Rights.
Mm-hmm.
None of this exists in Israel. All these are tools which can really part of the concept and the strategy and the idea of checks and balances. And because none of them are exist in Israel, we are very weak. However, the Supreme Court is the only organization which can limit and restrict, and the Supreme Court is actually the only branch that may limit. They can really overview, and they can review any law, and therefore today the Supreme Court and its independence are under attack. That's why you hear now in Israel a real movement, which is really fascinating, something amazing. It's have been never in Israel happened. So the weakness of the democratic structure and the constitution of the Israeli structures create a real challenge. All what you need, 61 vote, and you can change Israel from democracy to non-democracy. That's why it is so democratic, and that's why Shaul mentioned all the voice, all the people, all the demonstration is Israel is a democratic and not dictatorship country.
You know, this is fascinating to me because I certainly would have never known that this weakness existed in Israel's structure. And I imagine that you did, just to ask you both that question, did you and did others in Israel understand how precarious this democracy actually was until this, what you said, moderately conservative, I I'd call them more than, the current administration more than moderately conservative. They seem to be almost fully in the right wing, to the right even of Netanyahu in many ways. So is this something that everyone there has been aware of, and now it's just being tested for the first time because it's the first extreme administration that's been in power in this many years, since 1948?
I think that,
So whoever wants it.
with the foundation of the State of Israel already inherently existed an anomaly, which is almost contrary to a real democracy. And the reason is that, on the one hand, it is and aspired to be a democracy with different systems in place to protect the democracy and create democratic decision making and democratically elected government, but at the same time also being a Jewish state. There is no separation of religion and state like it is in the United States in Israel. It was supposed to be originally a state for the Jewish people, most importantly those who were persecuted and after the World War II. So already there is something that is almost contrary to a democracy where religion, no one knows better than Raed, being a Christian minority in the Jewish state, to what extent this is a sensitive issue. So this is to begin with. And then the reason, and Raed alluded to it, the reason that there is no constitution, because the first question is, well, why isn't there a constitution? What's so difficult? Create a constitution. And then, well, if you want to create a constitution for a Jewish state and you want to preserve the Jewish majority, and it's not necessarily that I agree or don't agree on this, but that was the reasoning behind the founding of the Zionist movement and the Zionist dream to create a state in Israel for the Jewish people. The reason is because if you want to create such a constitution for a Jewish state, well, first of all, you need to define who is a Jew. Well, who is a Jew? There are Reformed Jews and there are Orthodox Jews and there are different denominations of Jews, and not necessarily within the Jewish community all around the world there will be a consensus as to who is a Jew. So just that question will open a huge Pandora box, and therefore there is no constitution in Israel, and like Raed described earlier, but there are laws that are fundamental laws, unfortunately, could be changed very easily in the Knesset, in the parliament. So not only that whoever controls the parliament is also the government, but also this government, through its control in the Knesset, can change fundamental laws. And that's why it's so important to have some constituency that can limit the decisions of the government. And if this doesn't exist, then really we are not anymore a democracy. And that's why you have almost half of the population, even those who supported in the last elections the Likud and the far right, who are saying, well, first of all, we never heard about this issue before in the election period. No, never there was the issue about the reform and about changing the Supreme Court and changing how the judges are elected. That's another issue, not just limiting the possibility of the Supreme Court to limit the decisions of the government, but also how to choose the Supreme Court judges. The government wants to have a majority. Wow. So basically demolishing the tenets of democracy in Israel. And that's why you see this far cry. You see, I was driving in the streets and you see tents in the streets, and every Saturday night you see demonstrations in Jerusalem, and not small demonstrations, hundreds of thousands of people. So that is the situation. That's why it emanates from the real pain. So even though until now the system leaned itself in this direction, but now, like you said, now it's kind of coming to the surface because no one really imagined that there will be ever a situation that in Israel the Supreme Court will be challenged by limiting its powers by the government.
So, Raed, what you've been studying law. What have you been? How do you see this position that could this be creating some type of a forced need for a constitution, or creating some type of restructuring once we get there? Because right now there's still a lot to go through, which is the next thing I want to ask you both, is what the next step is. But do you see this, just to answer this one question, as a ripe time for a recreation of how the democracy is going to be administered or going to be set up? And the second question to that would be, doesn't that make Israel have to re-question everything about democracy, including the Palestinian question? But that's a lot in one, but so just start where you...
You see, I think the threat in today and the challenge today is to create an opportunity. Israel cannot go back. It's very clear now for everybody. It cannot continue with this constitutional structure. It should be changed. It cannot be today with this government, 61, other 5 years, another 61 can change. So they need to create a new model which can really underline and create the mechanism of checks and balances. The problem is, which is clear today, everybody now start to learn that from kindergarten, because each Saturday, 100,000 of people go outside. It's kind of creating a new knowledge. Now people and more people get better understanding what's going on, not everybody in Israel, because we have a very problem with the education system. We have a real challenge with the education system. Not everybody knows that. However, what is very clear now, that the government want an absolute and unlimited power. This is the problem. When we talk about law perspective, this is exactly the problem now, which is Shaul underlined that. The absolute and the unlimited power. You know, in fact, they want to overall close and control everything, including the Supreme Court. And this really challenge everything. It can really challenge the economic situation. It's challenging the human right problem. It's now became a very challenging, because what we start to hear, you know, if their proposal will pass, then we are in real and deep problem. Like every organization who are professional, neutral, objective, and independent, with their perspective, will be it will be under politicizing. So it will be like a political decision in everything. The judge will be chosen by politician, which that means control all the court and the legal. They also the legal advice of the government. They want to be appointed by the minister. So we are losing check and balances. Therefore, all the demonstration today is focusing in that. And I think the coming week, we're going to be a witness that the Supreme Court need to take a very serious decision to, in fact, defend and keep the state of Israel to be a democratic state. And I think the coming week is the real challenge of the Supreme Court in Israel to defend the democracy. And I'm pretty sure that they are going to this direction, because if they will not make a significant step to stop what's going now, it will be very late. It will be very late, and we will lose all the system.
So could whichever one of you wants to take this, for those who are not in Israel, who don't understand what the next step is, it's put, what is the situation right now? The Supreme Court has to make a decision, correct? Like this is where we're at. What's the next thing that's going to happen? Excuse me. What's the next decision that needs to be made?
I think.
Go ahead.
I think the next week, the September 12th, is very important days for the state of Israel. the Supreme Court need to decide if the proposal of the current government about the reasonable and the reasonableness issue, the new law will pass. I think the Supreme Court will block that. I think the Supreme Court, they will have the right to say this law is illegal. It's against the Constitution or against the basic law of the democratic state. And then it's going to be a real challenge and a real unique situation where the parliament, the Knesset, need to make decision to whom, if they're going to accept the decision of the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court cannot let this law to pass,
right?
Because it really it's like above the basic law, which is everybody, and now they're trying to change the game, and the Supreme Court will lose their power to review the law, to review any reasonable activity that the government is taking. So the next week is going to be a very serious discussion in the Supreme Court, and I think the Supreme Court they're going to make a unique decision. They never had that before, but the situation, they will lead them to defense, because this is in fact the last branch who can defend the democracy in Israel.
Kind of the last man standing. So, Shaul, can you speak a little bit about what, I know you said that when you were visiting last year, you participated in the protests. Can you talk about what is going on in terms of how people are protesting, not just physically in the streets, but also what they're refusing to do and other changes that are happening should this change take place in Israel?
Yes, so one more important constituency in the state of Israel, of course, is the military. And the military is not just the regular military, which is probably about 300,000 individuals who are in the military at any moment in time, but the majority of the military are really the reserves. So, for example, when there is war,
it's the majority.
There are about the majority, around 1 million of the reserves who join the war. So let's take one important example, which also was in the news and is taking place in these demonstrations. So first of all, like you said, there are demonstrations on a weekly basis, hundreds of thousands in Haifa, in Tel Aviv, in many cities around in Israel, where hundreds of thousands of people go to a particular location and mostly peacefully, demonstrating with raising the Israeli flags, singing the anthem, having people who are giving speeches in these demonstrations. So this is happening already for, I believe, 37 weeks on a weekly basis. But also, and then you're right, when I was last time in January, so it's more than 6 months now, I myself participated here in Haifa and also in Tel Aviv, and like I said, thousands of individuals go and demonstrate. So that's one way of raising the voice against this, what we call the reform, the legal reform that is being suggested. But there are other ways which actually are smaller, by smaller groups, but are much more potent and much more dangerous to the society. So I said earlier, the majority of the military in times of emergency are the reserves. So every individual who was in the military, after he ended his regular 3 year, if it's a man, 2 years if it's a woman, military service, compulsory military service. Then after that, they have to go usually for about a month every year until the age of 50 or so, depending on what their specialty is. So that for the reserve, they go for 1 month, they leave work, they leave their family, they go for 1 month to continue and train, so that in time of emergency, they will join immediately the war and Israel will be powerful, etc. So now, in situations where they're really specialized, for example, pilots, military pilots, combat pilots, they actually train every week. So until the age of 45 or 50, they will be training every week voluntarily so that they can continue and be updated with the newest planes, with the newest strategies, with the newest technology. And they actually are the ones in its majority who man the combat planes, excuse me, when there are attacks against Israel, when Israel attacks, and when Israel continuously operates on a daily basis in different places in the world. So they, who are the elite in many ways of the society, like in other countries, many of them have been against this suggested reform, and they already signed a letter. I believe it's 1,200 of them signed a letter saying we are questioning now our commitment to Israel when we have signed to volunteer to the Air Force in Israel. We signed that in the pretext that this is a democracy. And if this is not going to be a democracy, well, our allegiance is questioned, and therefore we are now questioning if at the time of emergency we will be willing to actually go. This is a huge thing. It's not a small thing in Israel. First of all, because of their status and their position, and also for their actual role in defending Israel. And we don't need to expand on how much Israel is threatened on a daily basis and how important it is that Israel maintains its Air Force superiority in the Middle East. And that's another part, but there are also high-tech industries, participants that are demonstrating and also signing all these petitions. And I can tell you, even from my personal experience, Israel is already, like Raed suggested earlier, is already feeling the pain of this reform, even in the decline, the significant decline in investments from the outside, given this uncertainty that Israel is experiencing. And this is like a lifeline for the startups and for the technology, which Israel has been so much in the forefront.
You know, and Raed, I know you have a thought you want to get to. I just want to clarify something that you said, Shaul, that you said, I think 1,200, you're talking about Air Force pilots specifically that have said that they won't show up for duty if this passes. But there's also at least 10,000 more reservists who have signed, and maybe more. Do you know if that is a correct number? Yeah.
That is correct. And you remember that this is this is a society that is dependent on its existence on the military and the reserves. And these reserves are saying, well, we are a part of the society, and if this society is not going to be a democracy, well, we are questioning our commitment, and therefore we're willing to do anything that it takes, not just demonstrating, but also publicly stating our issue with our commitment, and that's very much alarming.
In the most dramatic and powerful way they could actually do that. Raed, what's your experience of what's happening on the ground?
You see, I think if you make a site visit to Israel in Saturday, it's fascinating. And you see really Jews as well Arab are joining together the force and voicing their idea and struggling and demonstrating to keep Israel as a democratic state, because everybody is going to lose. And I think everybody realizes now, if the amendment is passed, the government will be completely free to fire all the gatekeepers. That meaning, even the attorney or the general attorney of the government can be fired. So that meaning everybody in Israel realize it's now the time in Saturday, go out of the home, demonstrate and voicing your issue, Jews and Arab, to defense and to keep the state as democratic state. And I do believe that's why next week I have a big hope that the Supreme Court will strike down and I think, will state that all the new reform laws are, in fact, unconstitutional because they don't have a choice. Otherwise, it will be late. They cannot then change that because next Monday is like to change Israel from one position to other position. And then the Supreme Court will lose everything. And that, I think, for most of the people who come from the professional discipline, realize and underline, and there is what Shaul mentioned, a great, public, civil, the civic society and the public and the military. And if you listen to the head, all the university in Israel, the president, all the university, all the IDF leaders, all the defense minister, underline that what's going now in Israel is changing the game, and they need to do that to stop that. Now, I think maybe it could be before the court next week, it will come to some solution. Yesterday, the president of Israel created a new document, which seemed to be that there is some negotiation, and I think the prime minister needs to make decision. And I hope that he going to make the right decision. Otherwise, next week he will discover that the Supreme Court is very professional, and they will be really the gatekeepers and the defense of the basic law. So they're going to strike down, and then Israel going to be in very sad situation, because it will be a constitutional challenge. In one side, they are the Knesset. In the other side, there will be the Supreme Court. And then the Mossad, the military, and the president of Israel need to make decision what they need to do, because we have a very serious conflict in constitutional situation.
You mentioned that on Saturdays.
There'll be one.
Go ahead, Joe.
One, I think, a simple illustration just to bring it home, and I'm wondering what Raed would think about this description. Imagine that you have a soccer game, right? So there are two teams which usually compete against each other. And let's say they represent the left and the right. So one time this one wins, one time the other one wins. But it can't be a situation where when one of them wins, they say, okay, you know what? From now on, because we won, from now on, the game is not going to be 90 minutes. It's only going to be 25 minutes. And we also, because we won, we're also going to be those who will be appointing the referees. And we would like them to be rightist. And we are going to change the game in this way or another. Well, that can't be the situation just because you won the game. All of these years, one would win, the other one would win, but can't be the change that now the one that won wants to change the whole structure of the game. And this is, I think, the danger, particularly since it doesn't look like, and I don't know, Raed, if you would agree with that, but it doesn't look like now with the current structure of the Knesset, of the right having 64 members of the Knesset, it doesn't look like this government, this coalition is going to fall naturally. Namely, that tomorrow 5 of them or 4 of them of the coalition are going to decide, okay, well, now we're going to move to the other side, and the government, because of the way that the elections and the structure exists in Israel, now it's going to be that the government falls and then you have elections. No, it looks like they're going to stay for the duration of this coalition, and therefore we're stuck with this situation for the next at least 2 years. But I also believe that even this government and those who are more moderate, those who are more thinkers, those who are more careful with the power, they also got the point that this society is not going to accept, or at least half or more than half, even those who voted for them, are not going to accept that this structure is going to change to such an extreme. And I think that's why now they're negotiating, they're waiting for the Supreme Court to make its decision, like Raed alluded, on the 12th of September. I do not believe that we are in a situation that we're going to lose the Jewish democracy, but I do believe that it's possible, and even that possibility is alerting for itself.
Well, you see, I think, Shaul, if you're watching and we are witnessing in the last 3 months, at least in the last 3 months, a significant a change among the Israeli civic society community. What is very clear now for everybody, Israel going to a situation they need to decide, or they will stay a democratic state like other Europe country, or simply people will immigrate from Israel. And I think the government, if you hear what happened in the last week, Netanyahu agree with this negotiation with the president of Israel that he will agree to freeze the reform for 1.5 years. The question why? It's happened because he start to realize that it's not just the question of the Israeli people. It's also about the relationship between Israel and the United States. When he want to go to the state in the coming 2 weeks, he going to meet Joe Biden. He going to give an answer. What is all about checks and balances? He going to meet people in Europe. Israel need a strong partnership with Europe and the state to maintain the common share and value, which is written in the International Convention of the Human Rights. So Netanyahu, I think, he realized that why the president of Israel, I think, with his new document, it's going to be a very strong basis for negotiation, but they're going to use that very serious after the September 12th next week, when the coalition will realize that the Supreme Court, they are very serious and they're going to strike down. And then politically, it will create the situation that need the guys to come and talk together and go back to the president. And the basis for the negotiation will be the last document, the last week document of the president of Israel, which is great, which is meaning freezing the reform and coming together to create a basic law which everybody can live with that. So I'm very optimistic. What will happen now in Israel in the last week, it will bring a better future for Israel, and it's the time to discuss a very serious question and about the constitution question.
However, I'm glad that you're optimistic, because I think when I spoke to you a few weeks ago, you weren't very optimistic. So these new developments are hopeful, yes. But they have also revealed what their true thoughts are, this coalition, and whatever percent of the country is backing that coalition. It's kind of like in the US. Now we're kind of seeing the true thoughts of people, how they want things to be. So I'm just curious how that, now that everyone in Israel knows and the world can see where this particular, the people that are in party right now, that are in power right now, this coalition, they know how the people think that are backing them, and they know how those people think. Just like in the US, we didn't used to understand that we were so divided until Trump became president. Then it all came to the surface. So now I'm just curious, let's just say that Israel does happen to skirt this through a lot of negotiation and influence, even from the US possibly, although I haven't seen much of that influence yet. What is her next step? Because we know what the true thoughts are now. So if we're going to reform, I say we, but if Israel is going to reform the Constitution, or create a constitution, or reform the government in some way, they know now what they're dealing with. Everyone knows what we're dealing with. Two groups that look at things very, very differently. And I just want to add into that subject that if we're going to call it like liberal and, conservative, I don't know if you want to go make it that simplistic, but let's just, for the purpose of the conversation, let's say that one side is conservative, one side's more liberal, if that's true. Then what happens if you're going to reform the democracy at this point to make it safer to continue the democracy? Are we going to expand it to include Palestinian rights? So, for example, Raed, you're Christian, but you're Palestinian by your heritage. You're not allowed to be in the army. Shaul went to the army. He's Jewish. Shaul, you just said it's a Jewish democracy. It is not a full democracy. It's a Jewish democracy. So is that, if it does get reformed, so if we avoid the tragedy, the recognition is made that the government needs to be reformed, is this now the opportunity to look at full democracy, including all 100% of the people who live inside Israel, and then, of course, Arab or Jewish or Druze or whatever? And then if that's the case, is it also going to expand to take on then the whole situation of the occupied territories? Because to me, I don't see how you break all this apart. It's all one. And if you solve part of it, it seems like you have to solve for all of it.
I
So
don't
what's
want
the
to
question
speak for
you're wondering?
Raed, but no, I don't want to speak for Raed, but I think one thing that does put us in a very common place, and also with our conviction that there needs to be peace and there has to be a situation where minorities and majority and different minorities, like you alluded to, have to be living in peace. First of all, we are both in this situation. We are both citizens of the state of Israel. And I believe that also Raed, and I don't know, I'm wondering what he will say, but we'll agree that it is a democracy. It's a strange democracy. It's a democracy that is dealing with different challenges that others do not. But at the end, first of all, in terms of the point that Raed can go or cannot go to the military, Raed actually supports that his community go to the military and serve in the military, and they can if they want. They can volunteer. They don't have to, but they can. And second, in my opinion, and I don't know, I'm wondering, Raed, what your opinion will be, but in my opinion, when I analyze the situation of Muslims, not just Arabs, Muslims, Arabs for sure, but Muslims in the world, I don't think there is another country where Muslims have the freedom to practice their religion as it is in Israel. That is because it is really a democracy. But of course, it's also a democracy that is facing challenges which are inherent to the fact that this was supposed to be a state for the Jewish people. But at the end, both of us are citizens in a democracy who enjoy the fact that it is a democracy. There are parties in the Knesset which are Arab parties. There is no any law that prohibits an Arab or a Muslim to become the prime minister of the state of Israel. In fact, Raed and I had a phone call this morning just to say hello to each other, since we knew also we're going to be on the show together. And one of the sad parts that both of us agreed is that 20% of the population, which are Arab, who have the possibility of voting and making a real change, the majority of them did not participate in the elections. And one of the reasoning why this government has been successful in forming a coalition, a rightist coalition, was because the Arab population did not use their basic right in voting to the Knesset. Hopefully, we hope that this will change, and in the next elections they will participate. And yes, we are optimistic, the three of us. If we were not optimistic, we wouldn't have worked on peace and hope and trying to put people together. That's our nature. And I also am optimistic that, yes, this is a challenge that is unprecedented for Israel, that it did raise issues that weren't raised before, but I also believe in its the basic DNA, democratic DNA of the citizens of Israel that are not going to accept that there's going to be anything but a full-fledged democracy. And I believe, as Raed said, that this may be an opportunity to make changes because we didn't see that these challenges will be raised, and now we do see. Now, in terms of just the last sentence, in terms of those, what they think, we don't control what people think. People can think in different ways, in conservative, extreme ways, in non-democratic ways. What we can control is the actions. And that's why it is cardinal that the Supreme Court can control the actions of the government regardless of what they think and what ideology they come with.
Yeah, I do agree with Shaul in terms of the role of the Arab Palestinians community in Israel. I think now I hope they will realize that they have the power to make a difference in Israel. In the same time, a new leadership in Israel, and I'm talking about the new leadership, are going to realize that the democratic system in Israel, it's evolutionary steps, changing from the concept of suspicion to think about what is the common and shared value which we can live together and respect each other in under a full equal citizenship. It's not easy, but definitely that's why the Supreme Court for the Arab community in Israel is the main defense. And I do agree with Shaul that the Supreme Court is so important. That's why all the time I mention them. If we lose the Supreme Court power, then really we are in a challenge. I think that Yitzhak Bougie document last week create the foundation what going to be happen after the decision of the Supreme Court. I'm pretty sure the Supreme Court next week will strike down the law. It's very clear for me. Otherwise, they lose. But it create opportunity now to start negotiate. And I do believe both the leadership in Israel, the new government, as well as the Arab leadership inside Israel, need to sit together. And the Israeli government need to take in consideration the need of the local Arab community to understanding what their needs is. Most of the report, we need to understand. Definitely Israel, with its law and its structures, the practical day life in Israel is democratic. However, we are a democratic state. We are a startup nation, but if we take the Gini standard method, which measure the differences between the community in Israel ranking number one. It's a high differences between the communities in Israel.
Wait, Raed, what was the word that you said? If you
the Gini standard is ranking the country and explain how much differences between community in Israel.
Between
the poor
Arab
and the rich.
Jewish communities.
And Israel, in this case, there's need a lot of things to work to bridge the gap between the two minority, the Arab Palestinians community in Israel and the Jewish Orthodox. So that's why I'm speaking about the new constitution and the new government. That's why I mentioned that Israel cannot go back. It's go. Let me explain to you what I vision. I'm a biologist. Inside the cell, we have a DNA. And the DNA made from genes. The cell has a cycle. And one of the gene, it's called PCD, programmed cell death. It's like it create a process that that cell will be die. The reform proposed by the current government is exactly the PCD of the democratic system in Israel. That's why I'm very optimistic, because Israel has outstanding human capital. Israel is a high states country. They will not let this government to do that. I'm pretty sure. because, all these professors, all this leadership, all this high tech, just 2 days ago, everybody was witness $280 billion go out from Israel.
What does that mean?
That meaning money investing economic, the reform start to create a very serious economic problem. Yesterday in the TV, people, they don't want to invest in Israel. $280 billion.
Because of the crisis.
Yes, next
because prior to that, there was huge investment in Israel.
Look what happened to the dollar in last 2 months. It's the shekel became very weak.
Mm-hmm.
So the economic situation is going to be very bad. This is what is the challenge, but it will be create opportunity. So it could be the government will simply break down, and they will lose everything. And I do believe next week is the time where everything will start to be changed, because international politically, Israel cannot, with this government, maintain themselves. And simply they cannot lead the country and go outside the country with this current reform. It's very clear for everybody, including Netanyahu. That's why Netanyahu himself, yesterday, 2 days ago, Shaul, if you hear, he agreed for the new document of Bougie for the President Yitzhak Herzog. What that meaning? He realized he simply cannot go, and each Saturday, everybody watching what's going in Israel.
Yeah, most it's very visible.
Go out of the home and demonstrate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but you say most of the people, but it's really like, is the country still split sort of 50-50 as to what side, as to what they're supporting?
No, I don't think so. I disagree with Shaul with that. In the last
is that what you think?
Year, if they will make election now in Israel, about 65% of the Israeli people will elect the normative government. Let's say like that. Even the Likud people will not vote for the Likud. This is very clear.
Because of the danger to the future of the state.
The reform will impact not just the Jewish and the Arab. It's also will impact the Jewish Orthodox, the Arab, the Ashkenaz. This reform will destroy everybody. It will be like Poland. So the economic situation will be dropped down very significant, and the international community will not allow this government to lead this reform. This is what I envision.
So you're hopeful, and you think all this pressure that's being brought to bear is going to bear fruit, and that the democracy will survive. Shaul, do you believe that as well?
I believe, what Raed is speaking about, the fact that more than 60% now oppose this government, is based on the recent polls that have been conducted and that show that indeed this government, if there were elections today, it would fall. However, they still have a long time until the elections, and so many different things can change. And I think that, like in the United States, there is a core that is to the right in the Israeli voters that is not going to change, that they will almost blindly support a rightist government also in the elections. And that's why I think that emphasizes even more, and in fact creates the responsibility for people like Raed, who are leaders in their community, etc., and are here in Israel, to indeed create the incentives and the education for the Arab community, which is 20% of the citizens of the state of Israel, to go out and vote at the time that elections take place. Because if they did, we wouldn't have had a rightist government today. So I don't know what is going to happen in the next 2 years. I don't believe that this government is going to fall. There are talks that a coalition could be formed with the left, but these are just talks. And at this moment, this is the cardinal issue. And in fact, it did take out people from their comfortable seats in their home. And indeed, the society is being shaken in so many ways. It split even families
Yeah.
to the extent that
Yeah.
family members cannot even speak to each other about the situation. But what I am hopeful about, and that's what I believe Raed will agree, that Israeli citizens, from the time they were born, educated, grew up, went to the military, participated in universities and education, they don't know anything else than a democracy, even more than the democracy in the United States, believe it or not. There are here cultural and normative structures that are so strong and embedded in individuals that there is no way that Israeli citizens will take anything but a full-fledged democracy. And I think that's why we're seeing what is taking place today, when this is a possibility that can jeopardize it. Also, you have to remember that both sides, those who oppose the reform and those who support the reform, they go to the extreme to make their point. Like, here is an
Right.
example. I do not believe that really at the time of emergency, the pilots that signed the letter that they said that they are not going to participate in the war if under circumstances that will change in the democracy, I don't believe that this really will happen. But it does make a point, and it does create a position that the government must take into account. And the same thing on the other side. I don't believe that those who are extreme in the right, who, like you said, think that, yes, we don't need a democracy. Democracy is against our values. I don't think that even they will be able and will be successful in projecting these ideas and thinking that realistically this could take place. I believe in the democracy and the cultural DNA of Israeli citizens, including minorities, because that's what we're speaking about. We're speaking about the fact that the majority will not prescribe for the minority everything. We have to take, even in a situation where there is a clear majority, we have to take into account the rights of the minority. That's what democracy is all about. But I don't think that it's going to get to a point where it's going to be an actual civil war between the two sides, because it will. And I think if now that both sides have got to the position that they understand to what extent there is a clear opposition to this reform, and a very vocal one, that they're going to back off. And I think, like Raed is saying, indeed, this is the time where, for example, the president that in Israel is a declarative, a formal position like the Queen in England, that this is the time where he needs to take a more active and a stronger and a more assertive role in creating negotiations, but successful negotiations. So we'll have to see how it plays out, but I think I will join Raed in his optimism that things are going to change, but they're not going to get to the extreme point where there is already a civil war and there is a dictatorship in place. I don't think so.
Yeah, I do agree. I think the crisis now will create the opportunity, and the president of Israel will take a leadership. And I think the next week is so critical day for the state of Israel, which also I do agree with the Shaul that 20% of the state of Israel are Arab Palestinians who are citizens of Israel. They did not play their role. Imagine after this crisis, when the new government will be formed, the leadership of the both sides sitting together and start to talk how we can create really and invest in many area which is really needed in the Arab community, and creating common and share. You see, you need to understand today 55% of the new doctors or physicians in the hospitals are Arabs.
55%?
Yes,
That's
55.
amazing.
I mean, Israel now, the health system depend in the Arab. Shimon Peres said, if I am going to hospital and let a doctor who come from the Arab, a nurse from the Arab, save my life, why I cannot create the foundation to live together without suspicion? And I think the situation today is going to there. I think even inside the Arab community, there are dynamics. Many people start to ask the question, why I cannot play this game? If I have the power in the parliament, why I cannot change? Why I cannot struggle and get my right like the Jewish Orthodox? You know,
Well,
the Jewish Orthodox. The
why
Jewish
aren't they? Go ahead.
the Jewish
Sorry.
Orthodox has a number like the Arab, but their power is beyond their number. I
Right.
think there will be great model for the Arabs in Israel to play their role and really change the game in Israel and have their power to make decision and take their right using the democratic system of the Knesset, where they allocate funding and opportunity for everything, for like a startup area in the Arab community, for creating a university where we're trying to do that and we failed to do that, and in Galilee, and having opportunity for access for job, for education, and they're doing that. You know, when you go for the area of medical and medicine, the Arab are really very strong. Now Israel decide to invest in education, in high tech. Now let me tell you one very simple thing. The highest number among women who study engineering in the world is among the Arab Israeli women. In the Technion, 25% of the students are Arab. 70% of them are women, Arab women. That meaning Israel discovered that the Arab in Israel can be an engine also for economic development, for civic society. And now both sides, the Arab as well the Israeli government, need to realize to focus in civic society and creating equal opportunity and equality to move forward ahead. So this crisis is not just bad, it's create opportunity for the future of Israel.
Well, right. I would say that maybe they're waiting for you to run for office so they will all 20% show up and vote for you, because that might be what's missing right now.
I would vote for him.
I would vote for him too, if I could. All right. On that note, we'll keep that in mind. Thank you both so much. I learned a lot, even though I thought I knew I didn't know anything. So I appreciate both of you coming on, and maybe we can have a return to see what the outcome was and where things are moving in the future. If you would both be so kind as to come back and update us.
Thank you.
Maybe in 6 months.
Debbie. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both.
Raed.
Thank you.
It's been an honor.
You, Shaul.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Never
Take
give
care.
up. We will succeed.
Never give up.
Inshallah.
Bye-bye. Inshallah. Bye-bye.